So today we're going to be talking about identifying your skills. I like this as an early workshop within the Creative Job Search program. And the reason is it's foundational knowledge. You may just be starting your job search. You may be well on your way in your job search. This can enter into any, any part of your job search can be enhanced by an increased knowledge of skills identification. The reason being is it's the thing that employers want most. Sure, they want work history. Of course, they want dates of employment. There's a lot of things they require, but really what they're looking for is what do you bring to their needs? And what you bring to their needs are skill sets, and they'll define what that means. It's important for us to understand their needs and make the adjustment in how we talk about our skills. We're never making anything up. We're never saying we have something that we don't, but it's important that we define our skills in a way that they will understand. And what we're going to do is talk about that throughout the course of today's webinar. So some of these things we're going to ask in the chat box. Some of them will just be questions you answer yourself. This first one is just a question everyone's going to kind of answer in their own mind. And the first thing is, what is a skill? I'm going to define that for you as anything you can do. And I mean anything you can do well, a skill set like breathing or walking. We're not going to talk about that. But if you can, maybe you've got really good penmanship, that is a skill set. Whether it relates to the needs of your previous employer or to the needs of a potential employer, we don't worry about that at this stage. And the reason for that is we don't know what the needs of a potential employer are until we see that job posting. We may see a new job posting that requires a skill set we've never thought about marketing about ourselves. If we haven't identified it, we may leave it off the table because we don't think of it as a job-specific skill. So it's a really good idea at the very beginning of your job search to just take a blank piece of paper, notebook, whatever, and write down as many skills as you think you could market about yourself or potentially market about yourself. So here's the question I'm going to ask you, and some of you may have seen this question before, but for those of you it's new to, I want you to put into the chat box, how many skills does the average person have? If you were to guess, this is not someone with a doctorate or 20, 30 years of experience in a field. This is just a general question of how many skills. If I were to give you a blank piece of paper, how many could you write down, do you think? We're seeing 10, 6 to 8, 30, 15, 50, 100. I would challenge anyone who puts 100 to think about that. Could you actually list 100 skill sets? And maybe you could. In fact, you should be able to, because the average person has between 500 and 800 skills. Now, the first time you hear this, it's very logical to be apprehensive about that, to be maybe questioning that and saying, Art, yeah, that sounds good, but that really does not relate to my job search. It does if you kind of break it down. And the reason I mention this is we tend to group our skill sets into a position title. So there's two examples I beat to death, and one of them is what I do, which is facilitating. Okay, the name itself, facilitating, might not be what employers are looking for. They may be looking for training. They may be looking for educating. They could be looking for presenting. So how I define or how I title that skill, that in and of itself could have an impact onto whether an employer finds value. So first off, I want to define what I do in the terms they use. Again, never making anything up. If you're comfortable with changing the title of what you've done, that's perfectly fine. Now, presenting in and of itself, that's a title. That is not a skill set. The skills that are involved in presenting, one, troubleshooting. We already had some troubleshooting today. Okay, we had some muting issues. We had some audio issues. How do you overcome them? Do you send up follow-up material? Do you record your presentations? Do you give speaker notes? And so there are some solutions to that. So troubleshooting, technology, understanding of technology. That's the other thing. The first time I did one of these, I did it in front of like 400 people. And no one had done this in this type of thing when we kicked off our virtual events about 2 years ago. So understanding the technology would be another thing. Public speaking. Many people are scared to death of public speaking. That is a skill set, and that can be used in an enormous amount of jobs. And the reason is, even that the job itself doesn't require public speaking, maybe you're going to run a safety meeting. Maybe you have to call back customers. Are you good at de-escalating? Can you work with angry customers? That's a skill set within presenting. So you take your job title and then you think about, what skills do I bring to that job title? And those are my marketable, transferable skill sets that may relate to a number of jobs, even outside of the type of work I've done before, because those skills are transferable. And we'll be talking about that kind of grouping of skill sets called transferable skill sets. The reason this is important is the average person, and I saw several average people here, identify 10. So if you have between 500 and 800 potentially, and you can only identify 10, you're leaving a lot off the table. This is even more important when you're competing against other people who may have further delved into what they can offer an employer. So when I interview, and I've interviewed hundreds and hundreds of people, when I interview, I look at trying to get a pool of qualified applicants on paper. Okay, so let's say that I get to interview and I've got 5 qualified applicants. Now that person, all 5 of those people might have gotten help. Maybe they've gone to a career force location or remoted in and talked to someone on the phone or through a webinar, and they've gotten help with their resume. At interview, they're on their own. They have to market their skills by themselves. So I'm getting the real understanding they have of what they can offer me. So the opportunity for any one of those 5 people to be the person I choose for the job is then going to be 1 in 5 or 20%. So what we find is the percentage of people who cannot identify, sell, or prove their skills in an interview becomes what's left, becomes the 80%. It's not the person who can do the job the best that gets the job. We have no way of knowing that. All we know is what you tell us. And if you tell us through your stories, your examples, your skill statements, that you've done similar type of work and have successful stories or successful figures that can quantify it, that's going to give me the confidence to let you try to do this job in the position, hire you for it. You may many of times have been in an interview and thought, I have more experience than these people. How could anyone be more qualified for this position than I am? The reason is they probably identified, sold, and proved their skills to the extent they could within that hour, hour and a half. So I'd like you to think of job seeking itself as a skill set, because it is. There are some extremely gifted workers who have a hard time finding work in some situations simply because they're not comfortable with the hiring process. And there are other people, and I've done job placement in a past career in which they were super easy to place into a job, into getting a job. Unfortunately, the jobs didn't pan out because they were good at selling themselves. They weren't really good at the work part of it. That's unfortunate. I wish everyone had the opportunity to do what's called a work sample interview, in which they would go in and they would actually do the job for a day or two, and then the employer would make their decision based on that. Unfortunately, in most cases, that is not possible. So we were really kind of stuck. I hate to say stuck because that brings negativity into the process, but we're really kind of stuck with the traditional interview in most cases. And in that cases, it's all about selling your skills to that employer. So how do we develop our skills? It's through a variety of methods. And of course, all the above is always the answer whenever you see something like this. But these are kind of graded. The most important thing is work experience. From an employer standpoint, they're going to put the most weight in skills that are developed in stories that are told from your work experience perspective. That's not always possible. Sometimes you are applying for a job in which your experience in which your skills come from something else, from your education, especially early in your career, maybe from volunteer work, from socializing with people. Hobbies and sports and hobbies I kind of group together, but there's a lot of skills that are developed that way also. The important thing is, if you have them to a large extent in work experience, you don't have to double down, triple down, quadruple down in trying to say, well, I've also done it in this, I've also done it in this, I've also done it in this. And the reason is we end up taking a huge amount of space on a one-page resume or in an interview, talking about things that aren't as important to that employer. So even though you may have a hobby that relates, you don't have to bring it up if you have enough of the relevant work experience. But certainly go into these other categories if you don't have it here. And that really helps to bridge the gap if you have a lack of experience. Really focus on the skill sets they talk about that are requirements. But if you have some extra skills, would be a benefit, those types of situations. If you have them, certainly talk about them. But focus on the qualifications, required qualifications, and make sure you're meeting those. Now, everyone through the course of my career, a large portion of the people I've dealt with have said, hey, should I apply for jobs that I have 80% of the required qualifications? An employer will tell you only apply for jobs where you have 100%. The reason they do this is if they were to say, well, you really don't have to have all of the skill sets. If you have most of them, apply. Why are they called required skill sets? And then some people would self-filter themselves out of that position simply because they didn't have all the skill sets. And that could create even to the level of a discrimination because people are self-filtering and they're still considering people that didn't self-filter. So an employer will always tell you, or in most cases, tell you that only apply for jobs in which you meet all of the required qualifications. There is a little bit of, I won't say gray area, but if you know you have the majority of the skills that are important to the job, in some cases you will get an interview, but be prepared to overcome any objections they might have to a skill set that you do not list. Okay, you may have slipped past their screening. They're probably still going to bring it up in the interview. So come up with maybe some hobby or some in-process thing. So I'll give you an example. If maybe you're applying for a maintenance custodial position and it requires that you have a special engineer's boilers license. Well, if you don't have it, you don't have it, and you're probably not going to get the job. But if you get to an interview without it, but you tell them that you have your test set up for May 21st and you're currently studying for that exam, they could make a contingency, hiring contingent on passing this. Some employers will actually give you 6 months to pass a requirement, like CPR certification or something like that. So give them the next best option. Don't leave it completely off the table as far as what you're doing to overcome maybe that lack of skill set. So the types of skills that are most important to an employer, and I'm going to quantify this or further qualify this by saying at interview. At interview, the type of skill that's most important to employers was a little bit unexpected to me the first time I had heard this, and this is a long time ago. But the first time I heard this, I thought, how could we possibly know? Every job requires a different set of skills. How could I, talk about anything specific to one job as a general? So it makes sense that it is a generalized skill set. It's soft skills. At interview, you are competing against other qualified, at least on paper, applicants. So nothing's ever completely even. I mean, there may be pre-existing relationships with, that organization. Someone may have gotten a referral to that job or a great reference that is, putting them at a different level than you, or maybe you're at a different level than they. But I can't control that for the most part. What other people do, I can only control what I do. So I always try to think of, I'm at least level with everyone else here. what can I do to set myself apart from these other candidates? And what do I have control of? And what I found that if everyone's qualified, what I can really compete at is certainly, talk about what makes me even more qualified. They're going to ask those types of questions. But it's been my experience that about 50% of the interview deals with soft skills. It deals with skills about how we get along with people, how we deal with conflict, how we overcome obstacles. These are called behavioral-based questions. So don't discount the soft skills, which are harder to define, and for most people do not come easily when they're thinking of skill sets to market. Anger, or de-escalation, adapting to change. There's other ones. Trying to think of some off the top of my head. Emotional intelligence. There's a lot of soft skills out there. And if you just look up soft skills, you get a whole list of them. And they're fancy terms, but try to break them down to what they actually mean. And if these are some things that you have, that you've done, create stories that demonstrate that. Don't just say that I'm really good at negotiation. I'm really, really good at mediating conflict. That sounds fancy, but it means nothing unless you back it up with a story. So active listening, excellent. Yeah, put some in the chat box here. Interpersonal understanding. Ooh, that's a fancy one, but it's certainly a soft skill. Now, someone put listening and someone put active listening. You may not have heard that before. There are differences. We all hear, but are we hearing to gain understanding? How much involved are we in getting and giving information? We all like to talk, but when you're not talking, what information are you getting from other people, and are you actively in that process? Partnership, relationship management, empathy. Oh, excellent. These are all really good. Because half of your interview questions are going to deal with this, it's really important to identify those skills and come up with stories. Because if you don't, what you're going to do is you're going to come up with something off the top of your head. And that does not often go well. One of the things I do in the interview classes, I encourage everyone to just look up, Google. I don't send them the list, because if I send you a list, you're all going to practice the same questions. Say, look up top 20, top 30 behavioral-based questions. And you'll get hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, of hits on different websites you can look at. It really doesn't matter which one you click on. They'll all be phrased slightly differently, but they'll deal with some of the same topics. And it has to do with, how do you get along with other people? How do you manage conflict? How do you partner? How do you overcome obstacles? And once you get kind of the 4 or 5 different types of behavioral questions, you can come up with answers that demonstrate your skill sets. So no matter how they ask the question, you'll know what story you need to go to, in many cases, meet or exceed the expectations of that employer. And remember, you're going to be competing against individuals that may not have done this. So it's a really good way of setting yourself apart by your specific personal story. Don't tell someone else's story. Some people will encourage you to do that, to say, oh, just look up on the internet for how to answer this question. Get the framework, but insert your own skills, because that's what you're marketing. If someone has a story they get off the internet, trust me, that employer's heard it before. In fact, they may hear it multiple times within that one interview process. It's happened to me multiple occasions. I've interviewed 5 people for one position and got the same, almost verbatim answer to one of my questions. And that really creates a negative to me. If I hear a story I haven't heard before because it comes from one of your personal experience, it's going to stick out. So take that extra time to do that. Try to do a mock interview if at all possible. I'm going to mention this a couple times today, but if you haven't done a mock interview before, those are uncomfortable in many cases for many people. Interviewing itself is somewhat uncomfortable, but if you want to do it in a really nice, safe environment, reach out to your local Career Force location and try to set up a one-on-one appointment with a Career Force staff person, and they can help guide you through that interview. It could be however you want it to be. It could be, here's the 5 questions I'd like you to ask me, and I'd like you to give me some feedback on the answers. It could be, could you just ask me some general interview questions? This can be done in person in some locations. It can be done online. It can be done over the phone, whatever works best for you. If you go to your local CareerForce website, you'll see if there are available appointments. I'll be sending everyone the CareerForce locator URL, and you just type in your zip code. It'll show you the CareerForce locations closest to you. Once you click on their webpage, you'll see if they have available appointments. Once you register for an appointment, just like you registered for today's workshop, someone will reach out to you and ask, how would you like to meet? Would you like to meet over the phone, online, in person? And they'll work out whatever works best for you. You can do this for resume reviews. You can do this for working through maybe some tough questions like how you left your last job, that sort of thing. But it's really good for mock interviews also. So I'm going to pay special attention to this one just because I've got a good example of it. How will you adapt, learn? Most people, I won't even say most people, I'll say all people that I've ever dealt with, myself included, resist change. Not really happy about change. So when a new process happens at work, people will resist it. They will sometimes get angry about it, and they will want to do it the old way. The one constant in work is change, especially right now. We've been implementing change consistently and rolling with the new set of circumstances we've all been dealing with over the past 2 years. It has really allowed those people who will adapt or learn to stand out. They're the ones that get noticed because they're the ones getting the work done. Very seldom can you do the same exact job for your entire career. There's usually going to be maybe some new machinery, maybe a new process, maybe a new owner. If you're someone who will do that, you don't have to be happy about it, but if you're someone who will do that, that is a huge skill set, and it's something I market at every single job I apply for. I always bring up a story about how I helped to implement change, how I was one of the people that was asked to help others to implement the change, or if not, how I implemented the change myself, how I learned the new process, how it eventually made my work easier, because those are the stories that they're going to remember. People who don't adapt to change are quite often the ones who complain to managers, to HR professionals, to coworkers about why are we doing this change. Trust me, an HR person will notice, a manager will notice if you have an adapting story within your what you're marketing about yourself. Someone said, that's funny. Passive listening, and I do understand. It would be awesome if we could all be in a room together and we could be calling on people and raising hands. The first workshop I did, by the way, and this was a learning experience, adapting to change. Like I said, we had about 300 people online, and everyone was unmuted. My goodness, was that a catastrophe? It was really tough. I had a moderator that was hitting the mute all button, and all he did the entire presentation, because people got on late. We'd say mute yourself, please. With 300 people, all he did the entire workshop was hit the mute all. And we tried to call on people, and no one got the information they were coming for, simply because there was just too many people. There will be local workshops in individual CareerForce locations coming up. There are already some of them. There's some of the standardized workshops being offered, and those are much smaller and much more interactive. So if that's something that you would really like to seek out, look at your local CareerForce location and see if there's any opportunities for that also. Okay, so how does identifying your skills help you in the job search? Well, I hope we've already proven this to you, that it will help to prove your abilities to potential employers. Write your resumes and complete applications, because what do we put on our resumes? We put, our position titles, we put the dates of employment, we put our education. The rest of it's all about skill sets, about skill statements, about stories that prove that you are qualified to do what that employer needs. It'll help you to fill out applications and not have a whole bunch of wasted space. Use the space available. You don't have to just fill it up with words. fill it up with marketable skills. They tell you what their needs are. And that's really, actually, we get too much information. When I first started doing this 20 some years ago, we were still looking in the newspaper. And if you were to look at an ad in the newspaper, that employer is charged by the word, meaning that a Sunday advertisement in the Star Tribune could cost $3,000 and up for one job posting. Because of that, they would say something like, seeking a qualified accountant with 10 years of experience, apply at this place. Okay, what makes you qualified? They've given me very little information, and I don't have a lot to work with. Today, when we look at jobs, for the most part, I mean, there are still jobs on the newspaper, I get that, but most of us would look online for some of our opportunities. In that case, we're going to get, a page and a half, 2 pages. They're not charged by the word, they're charged by the posting. And in many cases, it's free. So like for MinnesotaWorks.net, how you registered through MinnesotaWorks.net. That's also where over 100,000 jobs are posted. And employers will use a lot of space to tell you exactly what they need. So it's not that we don't have enough information to work with. Sometimes it's overwhelming and we have to decide, what do we focus on? So like I said, you look at those qualified, required qualifications, and then you look at just kind of based on your knowledge of the type of work you've done, what's most important, and you focus in on those. It also helps you to sell your qualifications in an interview, and we did talk about that. So let's talk about the types of skill sets. Let's take a quick look at the chat box. What about jobs that say everything and nothing at all? You don't know what the job is when they post it. Yes, okay, so in that case, I want to apply for those jobs myself. Or I would maybe call that organization for clarification. If they're not telling you what the job is, you really have to question, why would you apply for that job? Always know who the employer is, do the research on the employer. MinnesotaWorks.net jobs are vetted, meaning that we call each employer that register for an account. It's not just done online. They submit something online, then they get a phone call. I know this because I was an employer on Minnesota Works. I've hired off of Minnesota Works. I got that call, and they basically made me give them my unemployment ID, and that means I'm a verified employer. Not all sites are like that. Some slip through the cracks, and you may get someone who posts a job that's really a sales pitch for one of their products or a pyramid scheme or something like that. So always do your research and make sure that you know this is an actual employer. This is an actual job. And if you can't find that out, I would move on to other opportunities. So there's a next thing I'm going to show you here is what's called a Venn diagram. It really kind of visually shows commonalities in different groups of topics. So in this case, it's skill sets. So you may have a set of soft skills. Everyone has a set of soft skills. You may have a set of job skills specific to an industry. And then you may have some transferable skills that you've used in a lot of different types of jobs. What this represents right here, this little spot right here, if you can see my mouse, is that sweet spot of what's required for the current opportunity. So you're taking all of your soft skills, all of what's transferred before, all of the specific skill sets you've used, and you're finding where they all meet. And that's what you're marketing about yourself. And once you've gone through this process the initial time, you've got the data to work with. This doesn't change a whole lot. You're going to add things throughout your career. You're going to update maybe if you have a LinkedIn profile, you're going to add new skill sets you may have developed. Maybe you're going to seek out new training opportunities. You should always be doing that, by the way. If you are looking for work, employers want to know, what have you been doing since you've been looking for work, since you've been unemployed? Another question I get a lot is, boy, how do I deal with long-term unemployment? Well, define it first. What's long-term unemployment? To me, long-term unemployment is 5 years. It used to be maybe 2 years. We're in a different world right now. Many, many people have been unemployed longer than what we would have in the past called long-term unemployment. So if you haven't been working in the last 2 years, trust me, there's a lot of people in the same boat that you'll be competing against. What's going to separate you between them or them between you is how they market what they've been doing in that time period. Employers don't want to hear, I've been looking for work. That might be the truth. And certainly that might be what you've been doing. But think about what else can you tell them? And if you have nothing else to tell them, and I'm sure most of you do, think about what could I start doing today that could increase my chances of that next opportunity. And that does not mean necessarily, going out and paying for something. It could mean connecting with a dislocated worker counselor. If you haven't considered that process, the dislocated worker program run throughout the state by many different agencies assists people in retraining. So if you are unemployed through no fault of your own, I would at least have a conversation with a dislocated worker counselor. Call your local career force location and see if there is what their process is, because they're different in each location. And they may have opportunities, they may not have opportunities, but I would certainly look at that. What they're going to ask you is, what can we do? What would benefit you? They're not going to fund something that you just are interested in. That you would have to make a case for, well, like for example I gave, I've been a maintenance custodial for much of my career. What's prevented me from applying for a lot of jobs is I don't have a pool operator's license nor a special engineer's boiler's license. Getting those two certifications would really enhance my career possibilities. They may fund that up to 2 years of training potentially, but you'd have to make a case and do the research yourself. But there are some free things out there. For myself, I made the case today to my manager that there was some training I wanted to take, and it wasn't to get a new job, it was to enhance what I could do within the current job. But certainly that becomes now something I can market throughout my career. So it doesn't mean going to 4 years of college or 2 years of college. It just means here's something new I can say that I can offer you. During this time, I've been enhancing my marketability and my skill sets. At the beginning of the pandemic, we had offered something called Coursera. I'm sure many of you had at least looked into that. It was a free training opportunity that was a partnership with this training place called Coursera and the state of Minnesota. I know there are still some free courses on there. I'll include the link to that. And I'm going to include a couple other links. Now, these are specific to certain types of skills, but the one I like to put out there because it helps job search itself is the Goodwill Community Foundation's Microsoft Office training. It'll help you to write your resume and that sort of thing. And for those people that might use Word or Excel in a work situation, it's a good refresher if nothing else, but it's also a good introductory training for those of you who maybe haven't done it in the past. So someone had posted, would be careful about jobs posted on LinkedIn. I saw a job posted at a place and most of their website links did not work. Yes, certainly. When you are looking at jobs, do your research before you spend the time applying, because a good application is a specific marketing piece and it takes your time and effort. And I would not invest that time without at least making sure it's a real company with a real job. Oh, someone said, I got approved for Coursera on Friday. Looking forward to 2 courses. Awesome. Does Minnesota Works offer a refresher on Microsoft Office? So Minnesota Works is just our scheduling and our labor exchange. I'm going to be including, I did 4 courses on Microsoft Word and Excel. I did 6 courses actually, beginner, intermediate, and advanced. I recorded those and I have them posted on our virtual and interactive site. I'll include the link to that, as well as that GCF. That GCF training is fantastic. I've used it for as long as it's been there, 15, 20 years. I've been directing people and using it myself. It's absolutely free, and it's a really good introductory, intermediate, and somewhat advanced. You take it as far as you want. I'm also going to be including a testing site called North Star Digital Literacy. So you can just kind of see where you're at. It's a free test you can take online. It'll tell you where you could improve and where your skills are currently. And that's why I love having these conversations, because unless you know, you're probably not going to stumble on these things. If you type in free training, you're going to get some kind of fly-by-night websites that may sound free, but they may have viruses or they may not be free. So I like passing along these links as I find them, simply because they can be hard to come by. Coursera, I'll include some information on that in the follow-up. All right, so let's keep going here. So this is a quote I like because it really demonstrates people who do well and people who know what they do well. Many people are very good at what they do. People who know the skills, who know their skills, have the confidence of their convictions and can pass along and implement that knowledge in a far greater way. If your employer knows what you can do, there are some value added skills. Not necessarily you're going to talk about everything you could bring to a job, but if you have an understanding and an experience with something that could benefit a job you are currently in process with, that could be a tipping point. It kind of sweetens the pot. So if you have done research on an employer and you realize that maybe they also, are quite often submitting grant proposals, you don't have to say, I can write your grants for you, because that's not the job you're applying for. But if you have experience with grants, you can mention that, hey, I've done some research and realized much of your funding is through grants. I've got a lot of experience in working with grant organizations, and I'm very happy that I would be put in a situation in which maybe that experience could be utilized. You've got to be careful. You certainly don't want to say, hey, I'm actually applying for this other job, but you can add value to your pitch by doing research on the company. All right, so we've talked about the 3 types of skills. We talked about transferable skills, we talked about soft skills, and we've talked about job-specific skills. I'm hoping that I've kind of beat this into the ground, but it's very important to identify your skills. I hope you got that out of there. And one of the things I'm going to be sending everybody, I'm going to be sending you a lot, hopefully, is a skills identification kind of quiz. It's a online questions that you ask, or excuse me, it's an assessment, basically. That's the word I'm looking for. We have 3 assessments right on the CareerForce site. Rather than have you dig around for it, I'll send you the direct links, and it's a good starting point because it'll say, what kind of work have you done in the past? Based on that type of work, here are some of the skill sets that are traditionally held within those positions. It really can help you to start the process about how you identify and flesh out your own skills. And I really like taking assessments because it gets me out of maybe my mindset and gets me into the employer's mindset a little bit more. So I encourage you to take those, and there's some links that'll kind of direct you towards opportunities, sites, additional options. So let's talk about applications. Of course, we're going to put our skills within our applications, and this is just a real quick primer to applications. We talk more about this in next week's workshop, which deals mainly with resumes. Have your information ready before you start. Have your exact dates of employment, address, phone, salary, etc. You may not be asked all of the questions in all the applications, but more is better than less. So have as much information as you can going in. Even if you're filling out the application at home, it's much easier to fill out an application looking at hard copy of that information. You're less likely to make mistakes or leave things out. So one of the additional things I'll be sending everybody is a personal data sheet. I'm going to give you 2 versions of that. One's an online, and one is what's called a fillable PDF. If you want to print it out and put it in hand, that's fine too. This is even more important when you're filling out applications in person, because we write a lot neater when we're copying from paper than when we're thinking off the top of our heads. The exact dates are important. Work towards that. You may not have them currently, but work towards that. So question, how to cover a 12-year job that had lots of evolution? Oh, that's great. That's an awesome opportunity, by the way. It's a question we get quite a bit, is we go back 10 to 15 years of work history. You'll hear different ideas of that, but generally 10 to 15 years, and there's exceptions to everything. But If you worked in the same job for 12 years, but there's been a lot of evolution in that job, talk about, the adaptation to change, the new products. Hopefully, part of that adaptation was a new job title. Maybe a new company took over and you're doing the same job for a different company, so you can segment that. You don't want to put one position and then list 20 skills or 20 skill statements under one position. You want to break it up. Each situation's different, so reach out to your local career force location, send them a version of your resume, talk about any challenge that presents itself unique to your situation, and they can give you some ideas. So if you work 25 years with the same company, like my dad worked 44 years with the same company, I hope to work the rest of my career with this organization. I work for Job Service, which is a program within the Department of Employment and Economic Development. Even though I may work here for the next 20 years and have 30 plus years of experience, I can break that down to the last 5 years because I've had 3 different job titles in the time I've been here alone. You can break up long-term work history as it benefits you. There's, and again, it's very specific to each individual person's work history, but there are methods. So again, to have that conversation one-on-one with that career force specialist. You want to be positive and honest on applications. The only time I really see people go wrong with this is when they're asked the question, why did you leave your last job? That creates a lot of personal anxiety, a lot of, in many cases, anger. If you've been let go from a position, call it whatever you want, let go, fired, terminated, invited to leave, whatever it happens to be. That happens to many, many people within their career. And there's no judgment there. Every situation is different. It could have been totally the employer's fault. It could have been your fault. Who knows? It doesn't matter. All that matters is you were let go from that position from the employer's perspective, and they're going to want to know, does that affect me? That's the only reason they're asking. So when you fill it out in an application, the best method I've found is just to simply answer involuntary separation, and then be prepared to answer any follow-up questions they have in the interview. Remember, you're just trying to get to the interview, but don't bury your head in the sand with uncomfortable situations because they will ask about them. And then again, great opportunity to have a one-on-one conversation with someone to say, how do I best talk about this? What will help me? What will hurt me? And when we give too much information and go into the gory details, that only hurts you in most cases. If we don't give enough information, they ask follow-up questions, which then gets us talking again. So it can be tricky, but those are the kinds of things you have to have answers to. At the application, from the application standpoint, involuntary separation is usually the best bet. Make sure you're using the keywords, and by keywords, I mean, make your experience make sense to their needs. Like when I said, I use facilitator, but they use trainer. Okay, now I'm a trainer. I'll use train, trainer, trained. If it's a welding position, they're not going to just say welding. They're going to use the keywords of that industry. MIG, TIG, acetylene torch, making stuff up now. I don't really understand welding, but you would have to look at that job posting. Look at the words they use to describe the skills that you have. Use your space wisely. Fill out. People often ask, why do I write a resume and have to fill out an application? And I get it can be frustrating, but I think of an application as a filtering device and a resume as a marketing piece. You may have some of the same information, in fact, much of the same information on both documents. The way I feel about it is they're often looked at by different people. It's the HR department in larger organizations that looks at your application and maybe your resume, but when they forward it on to the interview committee, in many cases, they're only looking at the resume. And that's why we need to repeat that required information in both documents. Yes, you can certainly break down, I'm looking at, I'll read this. Is it okay to break down different roles in the same company? You can, but again, you have to be careful. I've had someone who was promoted multiple times within a company that changed names multiple times. And what it looked like was that person was job jumping every 6 months to a year. So what we did instead is we combined that work experience in 3-year sections to say, worked for, the title was Conwid/USG, and then in quotations we put in company merger, and then we put the full time they worked there, so it was 5 years, and then we talked about the various different things they did within those 5 years. So there's a lot of ways you can format a resume, and the key is what is going to benefit me the most. In certain for certain jobs, it might be that steady employment with the same company, and another one, it might be the way you can most show that you advance quickly within a company. It all depends on the needs of that job and your specific situation. Always follow directions and be complete. Most online applications don't even allow you to submit the application until you've completed everything, and that can be very frustrating. Find out, where did I leave something blank? Well, this question then created this question and then created this question. I forgot to answer that third one. I know that's frustrating, but take it step by step. Having all the information in front of you will allow you to do it much quicker, but every application is different, and they are going to have some different processes. In fact, some applications even require a canned interview, a recorded canned interview off of videotaped questions. Doing a mock interview with someone will really help you get prepared for that also. So we're going to do a quick proofreading exercise. Invited to leave. We're going to do a quick proofreading exercise. Some of you may have already seen this. If you have, that's fine. Just take a look at the chat box for those who haven't. What I want you to do is I want you to count the number of F's you see within these 4 sentences, only within the white area. I'm not trying to trick you. There's no tricks in this. Just read through this once, count the number of F as in Franks in these 4 lines, and put that number into the chat box. Take 10, 15 seconds to do that. 3, 3, 3, 3, 4, 3, 3, 4, 6, 5, 3. So I hope you're looking at this and kind of scratching your head and saying this was a very simple exercise. I see 3, there's only 3, or I see 4, there's only 4, or I see 6, how can everyone see all 6? The reason I do this is it's not an intelligence test, not to make anyone feel bad, but it's to prove how easy it is to miss things, even when you're looking at it for the first time, which I would call objectively looking at it. We don't objectively look at our resumes. We're too close to them, which makes it even harder. The truth is there are 6 F's in this document here. And for those of you who saw 3, you could read it several times and still see 3. And you would see finished, you would see scientific, and you would see files. What you would miss is the of, and the of. There's multiple reasons why we do that, or multiple theories on why we do that. We skip over 1 or 2 letter words. The F sounds like a V. Whatever you want to say, whatever reason makes sense to you, the key is, and it's very easy to do. I was working overnight at a Alzheimer's group home in the early 90s, and I was just absolutely flabbergasted. I thought, how in the world could I have missed those 3? I've used it ever since, just as a nice little gimmick to show how easy it is to miss things. So make sure you're proofreading your original copy, your sample application, so that you know is good. So when you transfer what can be transferred to the application you're using, you've already proofread it. It isn't a word, it's a preposition. I like it because some people take a look at this and say, oh my goodness, I can't believe I missed those. All right, so reason for leaving, we did talk about that, involuntary separation. If you are laid off though, here's the things you're dealing with. Many people who were fired will say they were laid off. So if you were truly laid off, I do give a little bit more information to kind of prove that to an employer. So say permanent layoff due to company restructuring, position no longer exists with company. Okay, so reason for leaving, we talked about that, and now we're going to go on to portfolios. I'm going to spend the last bit of our time on portfolios. If you haven't done this before, what portfolios do for you is they serve multiple purposes. And in what we're going to be talking right about now, it's that kind of takeaway for the employer. When you're done, the employer is going to have some questions. They're going to wonder if what you had stated was actually true. And a portfolio can do some things towards firming that up for them. So some of the things you can include in a portfolio is some work samples. You could include a reference sheet for them to contact people. A letter of recommendation is something everyone should attempt to get. You can include copies of your resume, your cover letter. And then one of the benefits I find that can really kind of set you apart from other equally qualified individuals is to put copies of your certifications and licensures. If you ever have to eventually prove something to an employer, you're giving it to them before they even ask for it. So I'm just going to show you just one last thing before we close here, simply because we are at time. All of this information should be what is called branded. So if you're sending out information to them that looks like this, like a resume, and it's formatted correctly and it looks good, you may have gotten help with that. If you send them a cover letter that looks like this, what they're going to think, what they're going to assume in most cases is this is the skill set I'm receiving. This is the skill set that person had help with. So meet expectations at all steps by branding your information that you put in your portfolio that you use to market yourself, so that it looks similar in format and feel. So this here is the same exact information as this here. The difference is the kind of wow appeal, that immediate impact is well formatted, similar to the resume, meets expectations. Now they're going to read that information without any personal filters or biases against what they perceive as a lack of skill sets. All right. Thank you. Branded. Branded can have a negative effect. Yes, you can be branded as a poor worker. I get that. But branding is a process that all larger corporations go through multiple times. I've been through many branding campaigns through the state of Minnesota, through former employers, and it's what employers do to get recognition so people know the brand. And there's many different ways of looking at this. But when I say the Golden Arches, you think McDonald's. When I say a swoosh, you're going to think Nike. It's because they invest millions, if not billions of dollars through the course of their career enforcing a brand. We all have a brand. And part of our brand is what we offer, but a part of it is visual. And this is just the part we can control in the time we have. I'll edit out the gap we had, and I'll include a video of this along with the presentation itself, the speaker notes, and all of the follow-up material I did promise. Thanks again, everyone. I really appreciate you putting the time in to stick with us, asking all the great questions. Please reach out to your local Career Force location with any additional help you may need. We may not be completely open physically, although in some cases we are, but we are here for you to help you with your job search. I wish you the best of luck. Have a great day, and we'll talk again soon.